personally, largely because of the relationship, both professional and personal, built with Kevin over the past 6 years. I think many of you have heard me say that Kevin's like family. There really isn't a better person. He's the best of us. We all owe him a debt of gratitude and appreciation for a level of success that he brought the organization that really hadn't been achieved since 2002. And that's something that we'll always remember.
Listen, Andrew Berry just sat down at that podium and said some things that don't add up. And I need y'all to hear this with me, because the more I listen to what he said about Kevin Stefanski getting fired, the more questions I have about what this means for Shedeur Sanders. Because if you read between the lines, if you really listen to the language Berry used, this whole situation starts looking different, and not in a good way. Berry sat there and talked about controllable areas and lack of progress, and how they didn't see enough development in certain aspects of the team. But here's what's wild to me. This is a 2-time Coach of the Year winner we're talking about. A guy Berry himself said is like family. A coach who, according to Berry, brought a level of success to Cleveland that hadn't been seen since 2002. And you're firing him after a season where, by Berry's own admission, they knew going in this was a transitional roster? Let's be real for a second. This raises some serious questions about what's actually happening in Cleveland. Because if the roster was in transition, if they knew they were rebuilding, if they understood this was a development year, then what exactly were the expectations for Kevin Stefanski? What were these controllable areas that weren't showing progress? And here's where it gets uncomfortable for me. Shedeur Sanders was one of those young players they were trying to develop. A rookie quarterback thrown into a situation that, from what we've seen, was not set up for success. An offensive line that Berry himself admitted needs a fair amount of turnover. A receiving core that Berry said needs significant investment. And Berry even acknowledged they're going to pour most of their resources into fixing the offense this offseason. So if the offense was that broken, if the pieces around Shedeur weren't good enough, if the offensive line couldn't protect him, how exactly do you evaluate quarterback development in that environment? How do you measure progress when the foundation is cracked? Let me walk y'all through what actually happened here, because the timeline matters. And when you piece it all together, it starts to paint a picture that should concern every Browns fan, and especially anyone who believed in what Shedeur could become in Cleveland. The Browns went into this season with 4 quarterbacks in camp. Berry confirmed that in the press conference. He tried to downplay it, saying most teams have 4 quarterbacks in camp, that the rep distribution might have been a little different. But listen to what he's really saying there. They brought in 4 quarterbacks to compete, including 2 rookies in Shedeur Sanders and whoever else they drafted or signed. From what we saw during training camp in the preseason, there was legitimate competition at that position. Shedeur was getting reps, he was running with different units. And based on the footage that was available, he was holding his own. He wasn't perfect. Nobody expected him to be, but he was showing the traits that made him a top draft pick. The accuracy, the pocket presence, the football IQ. But here's where things start to get murky. When the season actually started, Shedeur wasn't the guy. They went with veterans first. And look, I'm not saying that's automatically wrong. Plenty of teams sit their rookie quarterbacks to start the season. Let them learn, let them adjust to the speed of the NFL. Don't throw them into the fire too early. That's a legitimate development strategy. Except that's not really what happened here, is it? Because they did eventually put Shedeur in. They did eventually make him the starter. But based on everything we saw, based on the game tape, based on how the offense looked, it didn't feel like they set him up to succeed. Berry talked about how pleased he was with how the offensive staff brought along the 2 rookies, how they designed practice to develop them. He gave credit to Stefanski and the offensive staff for the work they did with Shedeur's pocket management, his situational awareness, his progression as a quarterback. Berry even said they saw a lot of progress with Shedeur this year, both mentally and physically. But then in almost the same breath, he said Shedeur is still very much a work in progress like many rookie quarterbacks are. And that they can't say definitively whether the starter in 2026 will be internal or external. That they're going to explore the quarterback market because it's too important of a position to leave to chance. Y'all see the contradiction here? You draft a quarterback high, you say you saw a lot of progress, you praise the development work, but you can't commit to him as your starter going forward? You're already talking about looking at external options before he's even finished his rookie year? This is where it starts to feel like something isn't right, because either you believe in Shedeur or you don't. Either you saw enough progress to build around him, or you didn't. But you can't have it both ways. You can't praise his development while simultaneously hedging on whether he's your future. And here's what really bothers me about all of this. Barry admitted the offensive line needs major turnover. He said they're going to invest heavily in the offense this offseason. He acknowledged that you can't accomplish everything at once with a roster, that they made a pivot last year and knew they couldn't fix every position group immediately. So they knew the offensive line was a problem. They knew the weapons weren't good enough. They knew the offense as a whole needed significant work. But they put Shedeur behind that line anyway. They asked him to develop and show progress with receivers that, based on what Barry said about Joe Flacco's performance in Cincinnati versus his performance in Cleveland, might not have been executing at a high level. Let's talk about that Flacco situation for a second, because it's relevant. A reporter asked Barry about what Flacco did in his 4 games in Cleveland versus what he did when he went down to Cincinnati and put up 300-yard games. Barry's response was interesting. He said, offensive football takes all 11 players, that it's about precision, that it's never just on the quarterback or one position group. That protection matters, route precision matters, route design matters. All of that is true. But if that's true for a veteran like Flacco, a guy who's been in the league for years and knows how to navigate bad situations, what does that mean for a rookie quarterback? What does that mean for Shedeur Sanders, who was trying to learn the NFL game behind an offensive line that couldn't protect him, throwing to receivers who apparently weren't executing at a high level? This isn't me making excuses for Shedeur. This is context. 2 things can be true at once. Shedeur can have things he needs to work on, areas where he needs to develop, and the situation around him can have been inadequate for proper evaluation. Both of those things can exist simultaneously. But what concerns me is that it doesn't seem like the Browns are separating those 2 realities. It seems like they're evaluating Shedeur's progress without fully accounting for the fact that the circumstances around him were, by their own admission, not good enough. Barry got asked directly about whether the roster was sufficient to win, whether he believed the players they brought in could have performed at a better level. His answer was basically that they evaluate progress differently for a team in transition versus a team in a contending window. That how you measure success changes based on where you are in your build. Okay, fine. But if you're measuring progress differently because you're in transition, if you understand that outcomes aren't the only metric that matters in a development year, then why are you firing your head coach? Why are you making a change at the top when, according to your own words, you were realistic about what this season would be? Unless the issue wasn't really about wins and losses. Unless the issue was about something else. And this is where I need y'all to really listen to what Barry said, because the language matters. He talked about controllable areas multiple times. He said they didn't see enough progress in areas that were controllable, independent of certain game outcomes. He mentioned game strategy, in-game decision-making, and specifically called out player development as a key evaluation point for a young team. Player development, that was one of the core issues. And who's the most important young player on the roster that needed development? Who's the guy that the entire franchise should be building around if they believe in him? Shedeur Sanders. Now, I'm not saying Stefanski sabotaged Shedeur. I'm not claiming there was some conspiracy to make him fail. But I am saying that when you fire a coach partially because of concerns about player development, and your most important young player is a rookie quarterback who's playing behind a terrible offensive line with limited weapons, you have to wonder how much of that development issue was on the coach versus how much of it was on the situation the front office created. Barry said something else that stood out to me. He said they're going to look for a head coach who can lead young players, who can be a partner in bringing along the young talent they're going to add in the coming months. He emphasized leadership as the #1 quality they're looking for. Leadership for the players, the staff, the organization, the ability to lead through hardship and crisis. But Kevin Stefanski was leading through hardship. He was dealing with a roster in transition, a quarterback situation that started with 4 guys competing and ended with a rookie starting, an offensive line that couldn't protect, and receivers that couldn't separate. If that's not hardship, what is? And Barry himself said Stefanski did some things very well this year, that there were areas where they saw good progress. So it wasn't all bad, it wasn't a complete failure, but apparently it wasn't enough progress in the right areas. Which brings me back to the question that's been bothering me this whole time. What exactly were the right areas? What were the specific controllable aspects where Stefanski fell short? Because Barry never really specified, he kept it vague. He talked in generalities about game strategy and decision-making and development, but he never pointed to concrete examples. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe he doesn't want to air out the specific disagreements or issues publicly. That's fair. But for fans trying to understand what happened, for people trying to figure out what this means for Shedeur Sanders going forward, the lack of specificity makes it harder to have confidence in the direction. Let me bring in what some of the media has been saying about this, because the reactions have been all over the place. Some analysts are saying this is a necessary move, that the Browns need a fresh start, that sometimes you have to make tough decisions even when you like the person. Other voices are questioning the timing, wondering why you'd fire a 2-time Coach of the Year after a season where you admitted the roster was in transition. But the conversation that's really picking up steam, the discussion that's happening in Brown circles and beyond, is about what this means for Shedeur. Because if Stefanski was the problem with quarterback development, if that was one of the core issues, does that mean Shedeur was being held back? Does it mean he should have been playing better than he was and the coaching was limiting him? Or does it mean something else? Does it mean the front office isn't sold on Shedeur and they want a new coach who might be more willing to explore other options? Does it mean they're already thinking about moving on from him before they've really given him a fair shot? Barry said the new head coach will have a lot of input on the quarterback situation, that they're going to work together to determine whether the solution is internal or external. And look, on the surface, that sounds reasonable. You want your head coach and GM to be aligned on the most important position in sports. But here's what makes me uncomfortable. You just drafted this kid. You invested a high pick in him. You said you saw progress, you praised the development work, but now you're hiring a new coach and giving that coach significant say in whether to keep developing Shedeur or look for someone else. That's not a vote of confidence. That's not what you do when you believe you have your franchise quarterback. When you believe you have the guy, you tell the new coach, this is our quarterback, build around him, develop him, make it work. You don't say we'll see what you think about whether he's the guy. From what we've seen with other franchises, when they truly believe in their young quarterback, they commit to him. They make organizational decisions around him. They hire coaches who fit what the quarterback does well. They bring in weapons and offensive line help and create an environment for success. The Browns are doing some of that. They're talking about investing heavily in the offense. They have cap space and draft picks, but they're also keeping the door open to bringing in someone else at quarterback. And that uncertainty, that lack of full commitment, it has to affect how Shedeur prepares, how he develops, how he approaches his future with the team. Think about it from his perspective for a second. You're a rookie quarterback who was told you're part of the future. You work your tail off, you take hit after hit behind a bad offensive line. You try to make plays with limited weapons, you show some flashes of what you can be. And at the end of the year, the GM says you made progress, but we're not sure if you're the guy going forward. And oh, by the way, we're bringing in a new coach who might want to go in a different direction. How is that supposed to make you feel? How are you supposed to have confidence in your situation when the organization isn't fully confident in you? And listen, I get it. The NFL is a business. Teams have to make hard decisions. If you don't believe someone is the answer, you can't keep forcing it just because you invested a pick in them. But at the same time, you have to give players a legitimate opportunity to develop, especially at quarterback, especially in their rookie year. Barry talked about how quarterback development takes time, that it's the hardest position to play. That evaluation is important, but so is development. He's right about all of that, but if development takes time, if it's a process, if rookies don't develop linearly, then why aren't you committed to giving Shedeur that time? One reporter asked Barry point blank if Shedeur can be the starter next year, And Barry's response was basically, "We saw progress, but we're going to explore all our options, and the new head coach will have input." That's not a yes. That's not even a "we believe in him but want to add competition." That's a "we genuinely don't know yet." Compare that to how other teams talk about their young quarterbacks when they believe in them. They use words like building block and foundation and our guy. They talk about putting pieces around them. They don't hedge. They don't leave it open-ended. The fact that Barry is leaving it open-ended tells you something. It tells you that either they don't fully believe in what they've seen from Shedeur, or they're not sure the development has been on the right track, or they think maybe a different coach could get more out of him, or maybe they just want to keep all options on the table in case something better comes along. None of those scenarios are great for Shedeur. None of them represent the kind of organizational commitment that young quarterbacks need to truly develop. Now let's talk about some of the other stuff Barry said, because it adds more context to where the Browns are as an organization and what Shedeur is walking into moving forward. Barry admitted that ownership evaluates everyone in the operation on an annual basis, including him. He said he owns the results of the past 2 years. He's grateful that ownership still believes he's the right person to lead the team through this transition. But the fact that he had to address his own job security tells you there's pressure from the top. There are expectations that aren't being met. And when there's pressure on the GM, when his job is potentially on the line based on results, that affects how he makes decisions. It affects his timeline. It affects his willingness to be patient with young players who need time to develop. If Barry feels like he needs to show significant progress soon or risk losing his job, is he going to have the patience to let Shedeur develop over 2 or 3 years? Or is he going to look for quicker solutions, veteran options, guys who can come in and produce right away, even if they're not? The long-term answer? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a legitimate question based on the dynamics at play. Barry also talked about Myles Garrett, which is relevant because Myles has been vocal about not wanting to go through another rebuild. A reporter asked if Barry is concerned that Myles might ask to be traded again, and Barry's response was interesting. He said he and Myles have good and frequent dialogue. He tried to reframe what rebuild means, saying they're not tearing down, they're building up the offense. That any veteran trades they make are strategic, not about dumping players for picks. But here's the thing. Players don't care about the semantics. They don't care if you call it a rebuild or a transition or building up. They care about winning. They care about being in a position to compete for championships. And if Myles Garrett is already expressing concerns about the direction, if he's already making it known that he doesn't want to go through this again, that tells you the players aren't fully bought into whatever plan the front office is selling. And if the best defensive player on your team, a guy who's been the face of the franchise, is openly questioning the direction, how does that affect the young quarterback who's trying to establish himself? How does that affect team morale and culture and belief? From what we've seen, Shedeur has handled himself well through all of this. By all accounts, he's been professional, he's worked hard, he's stayed focused on what he can control. But there's only so much a young player can do when the organization around him is in flux, when coaches are getting fired, when star players are expressing doubt, when the GM is talking about exploring all options at your position. Barry made a point to say that the defense is elite and intact, that almost everyone is under contract for multiple years on that side of the ball. He's proud of where the defense is, and that's great, legitimately. Having an elite defense is valuable. It gives you a chance to win games even when your offense is struggling. But it also creates a ticking clock. Because elite defenses don't stay elite forever. Players age, contracts expire, injuries happen. If you have a championship caliber defense right now, you need to maximize that window. You need to figure out the offense quickly, not over a 3 or 4 year development process. That's another source of pressure on the quarterback situation. That's another reason why the Browns might not have the patience to fully develop Shedeur. Because they have stars on defense who are in their prime right now, and they can't afford to waste those years waiting for a young quarterback to figure it out. So where does all of this leave us? What does it actually mean for Shedeur Sanders going forward? Honestly, it's hard to say with any certainty, and that's kind of the problem. There's too much uncertainty, too many variables in play. Too many unanswered questions about what the Browns really think and what their plan actually is. What we know is this: they're hiring a new head coach, and that coach will have significant input on the quarterback situation. They're exploring the veteran quarterback market because they can't commit to Shedeur as the starter yet. They're going to invest heavily in the offense, particularly the offensive line and the receiving core. They have cap space and draft capital to make moves. What we don't know is whether Shedeur will be part of the long-term plan. We don't know if the new coach will believe in him or want to go in a different direction. We don't know if the Browns are genuinely committed to his development or if they're already thinking about moving on. We don't know how much of the struggles this year were on him versus the situation around him. And that uncertainty, that lack of clarity, it has to be frustrating for everyone involved. For Shedeur, for Browns fans who were hoping he could be the answer, for anyone who wants to see this franchise finally figure out the quarterback position after decades of instability. Based on the footage we've seen, Shedeur showed flashes. He made some impressive throws. He handled pressure better than a lot of rookies would. He didn't turn the ball over at an alarming rate. He showed the intelligence and the processing speed that made him a high draft pick. But he also struggled at times. He took sacks he shouldn't have taken. He missed some reads. He didn't consistently elevate the offense the way you'd hope a franchise quarterback eventually would. The question is, how much of that is him and how much of it is everything else? How much of it is normal rookie growing pains that you work through with good coaching and better supporting pieces? And how much of it represents fundamental limitations that mean he's not the long-term answer? From what we can see from the outside, it's genuinely hard to tell. And apparently, based on what Barry said, it's hard to tell from the inside too. Because if they knew definitively one way or the other, they'd say so. They wouldn't be this non-committal. The fact that Barry kept talking about Deshaun Watson being on the roster in 2026 is another complicating factor. Watson is still under that massive contract. He's still theoretically part of the equation, even though he didn't play this year due to injury. Barry said they're pleased with how Watson attacked his rehab, how he engaged with the team, the progress he made in those areas. So now you potentially have 3 quarterbacks in the mix: Shedeur, Watson, and whoever they might bring in from outside. That's not a clear path forward for any of them. That's not a situation where anyone can feel secure or confident in their role. And for a young quarterback trying to develop, trying to establish himself, trying to become the leader of the offense, that kind of uncertainty is toxic. You can't develop properly when you're constantly looking over your shoulder, when you know the organization is exploring other options, when you're not sure if you'll even be the starter when next season begins. I keep coming back to something Barry said about the coaching search. He emphasized that they're looking for someone who can be a partner, someone who can work with him side by side to position the team for success. He compared the coach-GM relationship to a marriage, said you have to be aligned in how you're building the roster and developing players. That all sounds good in theory, but what happens when the new coach doesn't see the same potential in Shedeur that maybe Stefanski did? What happens if the new coach comes in and says, "I'd rather bring in a veteran," or "I want to draft a different guy," or "I don't think this is the direction we should go"? Does Barry defer to the coach's evaluation? Does he push back and insist they develop Shedeur? Do they compromise and bring in competition? We don't know. And the fact that we don't know, that they haven't established clear parameters or commitments, that's concerning. Barry said they're going to be open-minded in the coaching search, that there are multiple archetypes of successful head coaches, that they're not limiting themselves to offensive coaches or defensive coaches or guys with head coaching experience versus guys without it. They're going to search far and wide and find the right fit. That's all fine. But right fit for what? Right fit for developing Shedeur? Right fit for working with whatever veteran they bring in? Right fit for a roster in transition? Right fit for a team that has an elite defense but needs to build the offense? The criteria aren't clear. The priorities aren't established. And without that clarity, how can fans or players or anyone else have confidence that the decision will be the right one? Look, I want to be clear about something. I'm not sitting here saying Shedeur Sanders is definitely the answer, and the Browns are making a mistake by not fully committing to him. I don't have access to the practice film, the meeting room conversations, the day-to-day interactions that would give me a complete picture of where he's at developmentally. What I am saying is that based on what we can see, based on the public statements, based on the organizational decisions, it doesn't feel like Shadir is being set up for success. It doesn't feel like there's a clear plan for his development. It doesn't feel like the Browns are creating an environment where a young quarterback can grow and learn and eventually become what you need him to be. And that's frustrating because we've seen this movie before with the Browns. We've seen them cycle through quarterback after quarterback, never quite finding the answer, never quite getting the development right, never quite creating the stability and support that the position requires. For a minute there, when they drafted Shadir, it felt like maybe this time could be different. Maybe they had a plan. Maybe they were finally going to commit to developing a young quarterback the right way. But now, just 1 year in, they're already hedging. They're already talking about exploring other options. They're already bringing in a new coach who might have different ideas about the position. That's not how you build a quarterback. That's not how you create organizational stability. That's not how you end decades of dysfunction at the most important position in sports. Barry ended the press conference talking about how they owe the fans more than what they've given them the past couple years. How he expects them to make progress over the next calendar year. How they're positioned with cap room and draft picks, and an elite defense to take a big step forward. But progress toward what? What does success look like? Is it finding a franchise quarterback in Shadir? Is it bringing in a veteran to bridge the gap? Is it drafting another quarterback and starting over? Is it somehow making Watson work when he comes back? Nobody knows, and maybe that's by design. Maybe they want to keep their options open, maintain flexibility, not box themselves in with premature commitments. But there's a cost to that approach. There's a cost to the uncertainty, the lack of clarity, the constant exploration of alternatives. And that cost gets paid by the young quarterback who can't develop properly in that environment, by the fans who don't know what they're building toward, by the organization that can't create the stability and culture required for sustained success. So what happens next? Your guess is as good as mine. The Browns will hire a new coach. They'll make decisions about the quarterback position. They'll invest in the offense like they said they would. They'll try to build something that can compete while their defense is still a lead. But will Shedeur Sanders be part of that? Will he get a real opportunity to show what he can be with better pieces around him? Will the new coach believe in him and commit to his development? Will the organization finally give a young quarterback the support and patience required to succeed? Or will this be another chapter in the same old story? Another quarterback who didn't work out? Another regime making changes? Another promise of progress that doesn't quite materialize? I don't have those answers. Based on what Barry said in that press conference, I'm not sure he has them either. And until there's more clarity, until there are actual commitments and decisions and a clear direction, all we can do is watch and wait and hope that somehow this time it works out differently than all the other times before. Because Shedeur deserves a fair shot. Browns fans deserve some stability, and the franchise deserves to finally get the quarterback position figured out after all these years, whether that happens or not.